The autumn sky over Oak Ridge Park in Portland, Oregon, hung heavy with clouds on October 12, 2017. A crisp breeze rustled through the maple trees, sending crimson leaves spiraling onto the soccer field where 12-year-old Ethan Jenkins practiced with his friends after school. The municipal park, nestled between residential neighborhoods in southeast Portland, was considered safe, a community gathering spot where parents felt comfortable letting their children play unsupervised. "Pass it here," Ethan called out, his voice carrying across the field as he waved his arms. His best friend Marcus hesitated before sending the ball in a perfect arc toward him. Ethan was quick and agile, known for his natural talent on the field. His Portland Youth Soccer League coach had recently told his parents he had real potential. "Mom said be home by 6, shouted Ethan's younger sister Lily from the playground nearby. At 10 years old, she was responsible enough to walk the 6 blocks home with her brother when practice ended. Yeah, Ethan called back, never taking his eyes off the ball. His cleats, bright blue Adidas Predators that had been a gift for his last birthday, dug into the soft earth as he maneuvered around the makeshift goalposts his friends had set up using their backpacks. As evening approached, the other boys began to leave one by one, called home for dinner by text messages from their parents. The park gradually emptied as families packed up their picnic blankets and dog walkers headed home before darkness fell completely. "Come on, Ethan," Lily called again, her patience wearing thin as she clutched her science textbook to her chest. "It's starting to rain." "Just 5 more minutes," Ethan replied, now practicing solo shots at the goal. "You can go if you want. Tell Mom I'll be right behind you." Lily hesitated, glancing at the darkening sky. "You sure?" "I'm 12, not 5, he said, with the confidence of a boy on the edge of his teenage years. "I'll be home before it gets dark, promise." With a shrug, Lily turned and headed down the familiar path toward their neighborhood. Their house on Hawthorne Boulevard was close enough that their parents allowed them this small measure of independence, though they typically insisted the siblings walk together. At 6:45 p.m., Diana Jenkins glanced at the kitchen clock for the 3rd time. Dinner was ready, and Lily had arrived home 20 minutes earlier, but there was still no sign of Ethan. She felt the first flutters of concern in her stomach. "He said, he was right behind me," Lily explained, setting the table as instructed. "He was just practicing penalty kicks." By 7:15 p.m., both Diana and her husband Robert had tried calling Ethan's phone repeatedly. Each call went straight to voicemail. Robert put on his jacket. "I'm going to the park to get him," he said, trying to keep his voice calm for Lily's sake. He probably lost track of time. But when Robert arrived at Oak Ridge Park, the soccer field was empty. The only signs that children had been playing there earlier were a few muddy footprints and a water bottle someone had left behind. The bottle wasn't Ethan's. By midnight, Oak Ridge Park was illuminated by the harsh beams of police flashlights. As officers searched every inch of the 12-acre grounds, Ethan's phone was discovered in the grass near the goal, its battery dead. His backpack was found on the sidelines, but of Ethan himself there was no trace. As dawn broke over Portland, the first news vans arrived at the park. The disappearance of a child was always newsworthy, but there was something particularly chilling about a boy vanishing from a popular park in broad daylight. 12-year-old Ethan Jenkins was last seen playing soccer at Oak Ridge Park yesterday evening, reported a solemn-faced journalist from KGW News. Police are asking anyone who may have seen anything unusual in the area between 6 and 7 p.m. to come forward immediately. The days that followed were a blur for the Jenkins family. Their living room became an impromptu command center as friends, neighbors, and volunteers coordinated search efforts. Diana barely slept, startling at every phone call and doorbell ring. Robert took leave from his job at the architectural firm to join the search parties that combed through neighboring woods, ravines, and urban areas. Posters with Ethan's smiling face appeared on every street corner in Portland. His school picture showed a boy with tousled brown hair, bright green eyes, and a spattering of freckles across his nose. The community rallied, but as days turned to weeks, the initial surge of media attention began to wane. Detective Elena Ramirez of the Portland Police Bureau's Missing Persons Unit refused to let the case go cold. "We're following every lead," she assured the Jenkins family during her daily visits. But privately, she was troubled by the complete lack of witnesses or evidence. It was as if Ethan had simply vanished into thin air. The only clue, if it could even be called that, was that one of Ethan's blue Adidas cleats was missing. He had been wearing both when last seen by his sister, but only one was found near the goal post. The significance of this detail wouldn't become clear until much later. 3 years after Ethan's disappearance, the Jenkins family was irrevocably changed. Diana and Robert had divorced, a common outcome for parents of missing children. The strain of grief, combined with their different coping mechanisms, had slowly pulled them apart. Diana remained in their Portland home, unable to leave, the place where she felt closest to her missing son. Robert had moved to an apartment across town, throwing himself into his work while volunteering on weekends with organizations that helped locate missing children. Lily, now 13, had grown quiet and introspective. Once an outgoing child, with a passion for science, she now moved through the world with caution, as if expecting disaster at every turn. She refused to walk home alone and had given up her own soccer aspirations, the sport now an unwelcome reminder of her brother. Despite the passage of time, Detective Ramirez kept Ethan's file on her desk. The case had become personal for her, a persistent puzzle she was determined to solve. There had been potential sightings of Ethan over the years, a boy who resembled him at a mall in Seattle, another at a gas station in Boise, but each lead had evaporated upon investigation. The Oak Ridge Park case, as it had come to be known, occasionally resurfaced in the media, usually on the anniversary of Ethan's disappearance. Local journalists would run update pieces, noting the lack of progress and featuring interviews with experts who speculated about what might have happened. In cases like these, the first 48 hours are critical, forensic psychologist Dr. Martin Chen explained during one such segment on the 3rd anniversary. The fact that no body was found suggests several possibilities, including that Ethan Jenkins may still be alive. Those words had given Diana a renewed sense of hope, however slim. She clung to the belief that somewhere, somehow, her son was surviving. Every night, she left the porch light on, and Ethan's bedroom exactly as it had been on the day he disappeared. In October 2020, a development in an apparently unrelated case caught Detective Ramirez's attention. A convicted sex offender named Gerald Watts had been arrested in Eugene, Oregon, approximately 110 miles south of Portland. While the charges were related to a recent offense, something in Watts' background struck Ramirez as worth investigating. Watts had worked as a landscaper for the Portland Parks Department from 2016 to 2018, including the period when Ethan disappeared. His work records showed he had been assigned to Oak Ridge Park for maintenance during that time. More significantly, he had abruptly quit his job and left Portland just 2 weeks after Ethan went missing. "We need to talk to him," Ramirez told her partner, Detective Marcus Collins, as she spread the employment records across her desk. "This could be the break we've been waiting for." The interview with Watts at the Lane County Jail yielded nothing concrete. The man was uncooperative, refusing to answer questions about his time in Portland or his whereabouts on the day of Ethan's disappearance. Without evidence linking him directly to the case, they couldn't compel him to talk. "He knows something," Ramirez insisted as they drove back to Portland. "Did you see how he reacted when I mentioned Oak Ridge Park? That wasn't the face of someone hearing about a place for the first time, but hunches weren't enough. to build a case. They needed evidence, and after 3 years, the trail had gone cold. What they didn't know was that the key to unlocking the mystery lay buried in mud, waiting to be discovered. On a rainy weekend in late March 2023, 24-year-old wilderness guide Tyler Rodriguez led a group of high school students on a camping trip in the Mount Hood National Forest. The excursion was part of an outdoor education program for at-risk teens from Portland public schools. The location, Eagle Creek Trail, was a popular hiking area about 40 miles east of Portland. Known for its spectacular waterfalls and lush forest scenery, it also featured challenging terrain that Tyler used to teach wilderness survival skills. "Remember to stay on the marked trail," Tyler cautioned as they set up camp near a tributary of Eagle Creek. "The ravines in this area can be treacherous, especially after rainfall." The warning wasn't heeded by 16-year-old Javier Mendoza, who snuck away from the campsite at dawn the next morning, eager to explore on his own. He followed a deer trail down into a steep ravine, using roots and rocks as natural handholds to navigate the slippery descent. The recent March rains had turned parts of the ravine into a muddy obstacle course. Javier was about to turn back when something caught his eye. A flash of blue, partially buried in the mud near the water's edge. Curious, he scrambled down to investigate, nearly losing his footing in the process. Reaching the spot, he used a stick to carefully dig around the object. "No way," he whispered as he unearthed a mud-caked soccer cleat. It was faded from exposure but still recognizably blue. An Adidas Predator, size 5.5, with the initials EJ written in black marker on the inside heel. When Javier returned to camp clutching his find, Tyler immediately recognized the potential significance. The story of Ethan Jenkins had been covered extensively in local media, and the detail about the missing cleat had been mentioned in several articles. As a Portland native, Tyler had followed the case over the years. "Where exactly did you find this?" he asked Javier, carefully placing the muddy cleat in a plastic bag from his first aid kit. Within hours, Detective Ramirez was making her way down the treacherous ravine, accompanied by Tyler, Javier, and a team of forensic specialists from the Portland Police Bureau. The location was approximately 43 miles from Oak Ridge Park, a significant distance that immediately raised questions about how the cleat had ended up there. "Could an animal have carried it?" suggested one of the younger officers. "Not likely," Ramirez replied, surveying the steep embankment. "Not this far, and not without showing more damage. Someone brought this here." The discovery of the cleat reinvigorated the investigation. News of the find spread quickly, and the Jenkins case once again became headline news. Diana, now working as a victims advocate for a non-profit organization, appeared on local television, her eyes bright with renewed hope. "This proves what I've always believed, that there are still answers out there," she told reporters. "I'm grateful to Javier for finding this piece of my son, and I'm asking anyone who might know anything to please come forward." The forensic analysis of the cleat provided crucial new evidence. Despite years of exposure to the elements, traces of DNA were recovered from the shoelaces and interior. The DNA matched samples from Ethan's toothbrush and hairbrush that had been collected during the initial investigation. More significantly, soil samples embedded in the cleat's studs didn't match the composition of the ravine mud. Instead, they contained particles consistent with the soil from a construction site that had been active in 2017, a residential development adjacent to Mount Hood National Forest. Detective Ramirez cross-referenced this information with employment records from that period. Gerald Watts, the former Parks Department employee who had been on their radar, had briefly worked for the construction company that developed the site in late 2017 after leaving his job in Portland. "We need to search that entire area," Ramirez told her superiors. "This is the first physical evidence we've had in 6 years." The search of the former construction site began on April 3, 2023. Now a completed residential community called Eagle Ridge Estates, the area encompassed over 50 acres of developed land. Focusing on the undeveloped portions along the property's edge, forensic teams methodically combed through the terrain using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. On the second day of searching, in a secluded wooded area that bordered the development, the dogs alerted to a spot beneath a large Douglas fir. The ground there showed no obvious signs of disturbance, but when investigators began to dig, they discovered human remains buried approximately 4 feet below the surface. The medical examiner confirmed what the Jenkins family had feared for 6 years. Through dental records, the remains were positively identified as those of Ethan Jenkins. He had been buried wearing one blue Adidas cleat. The other, the one found in the ravine, had apparently been lost or discarded separately. The autopsy revealed that Ethan had died from blunt force trauma to the head. Based on the condition of the remains and the surrounding soil, the medical examiner estimated that he had been buried shortly after his disappearance in 2017. Armed with this evidence, Detective Ramirez obtained a warrant to search Gerald Watts' residence in Eugene and his previous homes. In a storage unit rented under his mother's name, they discovered a box containing newspaper clippings about Ethan's disappearance and, most damning of all, Ethan's backpack, the one that had been found at the park and logged as evidence only, to mysteriously disappear from the police storage facility months later. When confronted with this evidence, Watts finally confessed. He had been working at Oak Ridge Park that evening in October 2017, collecting trash and locking up facilities. He spotted Ethan alone on the soccer field and, claiming there had been reports of vandalism, offered to drive him home. "I never meant to hurt him," Watts claimed during his recorded confession. "But when he realized I wasn't taking him home, he tried to jump out of the truck. There was a struggle. He hit his head on the dashboard. I panicked." Watts revealed that he had taken Ethan's body to the construction site where he had secured a job for the following week. Working alone on a Sunday, he buried the boy in what was then a wooded area slated to be partially cleared. The missing cleat had fallen off during the transport and had been tossed into the ravine in a hasty attempt to dispose of evidence. On June 15, 2023, Gerald Watts was charged with the kidnapping and murder of Ethan Jenkins. The case never went to trial, as Watts accepted a plea deal that would see him spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the Jenkins family, the discovery brought a complicated mix of grief and relief. The uncertainty that had haunted them for 6 years was finally replaced with the painful clarity of truth. "We've been in limbo for so long," Robert Jenkins told reporters after Watts' sentencing. "Part of me still expected to see Ethan walk through the door someday. Now we at least know what happened, and we can begin to properly mourn our son." Diana, who had never given up hope of finding answers, established a foundation in Ethan's name dedicated to improving search protocols for missing children and supporting families going through similar ordeals. Lily, now 16, found her voice as an advocate for child safety awareness. "My brother's story shows how important it is to keep searching, to keep asking questions," she said during a speech at her high school. "One discovery, even years later, can bring closure to a family and justice for a victim." On what would have been Ethan's 18th birthday, the Jenkins family, along with Detective Ramirez, Tyler Rodriguez, and Javier Mendoza, gathered at Oak Ridge Park for the dedication of a new soccer field named in Ethan's honor, a memorial. Plaque detailed how a boy's love for soccer, a dedicated detective, and a fortuitous discovery had finally brought truth to light. As youth soccer teams played on the newly dedicated field that afternoon, a soft rain began to fall over Portland. Diana Jenkins looked up at the sky, feeling, for the first time in years, a sense of peace. "He's home now," she whispered, watching. The next generation of young athletes play the game her son had loved. He's finally home.